Let's talk about something that's really amazing in my mind. A new Gallup poll showing that Democrats have given up on capitalism, looking towards socialism for the answers. In fact, the poll revealed that 57% of Democrats view socialism positively. However, the real shocker here is that only 47% have a favorable view of capitalism. That's nearly a 10% drop from just 2 years ago. That's 10 percentage points. Here to discuss for Connell, chairman of CivicForumPAC, Kayleigh McEnany, RNC spokeswoman. Ford, I got to tell you something. This is not necessarily new per se on the socialist side. These numbers haven't changed a lot for millennials or for Democrats in terms of how they positively view socialism. What's dropped dramatically is their belief that capitalism is the answer. In 2010, 18 to 29-year-olds, 68% had a positive view of capitalism. That number has fallen all the way to, as you can see on your screen now, to 45%. To me, that poses an amazing political and economic problem.
Well, look, I have to say this. Somewhere Adam Smith, the father of modern capitalism, is rolling over his grave in disgust. I think what this poll shows you is how far left the Democratic Party is moving and how radical they've actually become. And you're absolutely right. It's not that socialism is on the rise with Democrats that's the problem. It's that capitalism is on the decline, significantly a 9-point drop from 2016. And that's amazing given the positive economic news we've had in this country under President Trump, whether it's 3 million jobs, whether it's manufacturing jobs on the rise. The bottom line is the Democrats are going all in for socialism and ignoring capitalism. And frankly, history suggests, modern history, basic math, and the rise of oppressive regimes, that socialism just does not work.
Well, I got to tell you, we all know history, Kayleigh, but people who are living in the here and now are saying, hey, when Adam Smith was around, old folks passed away, right? They didn't live until 80 and hog up all the wealth. Essentially, there's a report out from Credit Suisse. They do it every year, the Global Wealth Report, and it says the same thing. It calls millennials unlucky. They're saying to be born at this particular time when housing prices are through the roof, where college tuition is through the roof, where all the wealth is hoarded by the wealthy older folks of any political denomination. They are saying capitalism no longer works for them.
I mean, that is a fair point in the sense of millennials being disenchanted. They were shut out of the job market for a decade. Many of my peers who I graduated with did the right things, got the top grades, graduated the top of their class, couldn't find the job, had to stay at home with mom, not because of laziness, but because there simply was not opportunity in 2008. So I understand, the pain that my generation has had to go through. But now, to Ford's point, we are seeing the fruits of capitalism, where wages are going up at the fastest pace in 10 years, historic numbers on the unemployment front, the fact that we have 4.1% GDP. Capitalism is working, and I think we're going to see a tide of millennials who now embrace the system because they see capitalism working. Much different picture today than what we saw in 2008.
Of course, Ford, we just had a round of elections where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders back candidates all lost. So, the complete takeover of the Democratic Party by the socialists hasn't arrived here yet, but the writing is on the wall.
You're absolutely right. And look, I see a political opportunity here for Republicans and other sort of endangered right-leaning candidates in purple states. And that is the fact that when you get to a midterm election, traditionally older voters turn out. Who do I mean? Those folks who are 50 years and plus are usually the most likely to turn out in a midterm election. When you look at this sort of capitalism-socialism divide, they prefer capitalism at a 2-to-1 clip. If I'm the Republican Party, I'm going to go into some of those districts and I'm going to make that point and remind them in a contrast ad exactly where the Democrats are headed and what that might mean for you.
Kayleigh, this reminds me over the weekend, Nancy Pelosi was being interviewed, and she really had a very difficult time articulating what Democrats are stand for these days, what they would like to get it done. She mentioned infrastructure, which is something they've actually been obstructionists against because President Trump has laid out a couple of proposals there. But what about the administration talking more even about the fact that the same tide is lifting all ships? We saw in that jobs report 500,000 high school folks with only a high school diploma come into the labor force, and even more got a job. I mean, isn't that what we're really saying? Hey, don't give up on capitalism. Don't give up on America. Don't give up on the foundation of our greatness too soon.
That's exactly what we're trying to say. That's the message of our party, that positive economic message that you just articulated. The fact that blue-collar workers are finally getting access to those manufacturing jobs that were fleeing before President Trump came on the horizon. So we have such a good story to tell, and it's really important, Charles, to do segments like this and have discussions like this, because 2020 will be the first year where millennials will not just make up a majority of the voting population, the eligible population, but actually are showing up to the polls. Even though they turn out at low rates, they will be the majority voting population in 2020. And we have to share with this generation, socialism fails. And I know it might sound, nice to not talk about Venezuela and talk about Sweden and Denmark, but it's failing there too. When you have folks in Sweden, middle class, can't even afford cars because of a 180% tax. And in Denmark, you have the founder of IKEA who had to leave the country because of onerous taxation. So we've got to make this argument and bring rational thought to the socialism argument.
Let me just say one thing, Ford, because the owner of IKEA was also notoriously cheap, right? I mean, this is a guy who took the bus and insisted on a senior citizen discount. And a lot of people are saying that's just it. You got someone like that worth $40 billion and still won't share with society. We're going to hear a lot about sharing the wealth. And if that doesn't happen, then maybe a government offering universal the UDI, right? The everyone getting a certain amount of payment enforced by the government.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. You've got to move this debate to basically free market versus government control industry. Because when I look deep into a lot of this polling, Charles, you and I are a little bit older, so when we hear socialism, we do think Cuba, Venezuela, the USSR. When I listen to people in my class that are 18 to 29 years old, what they wind up telling me is, positive things like Canada, like Denmark, what we hear in Europe. And you've got to move it away from what they perceive as socialism to the actual realities of what happens when you go along this path and you start offering everything for free, because at some point you are going to run out of everybody's money.
And of course, we know that those places aren't necessarily generating prosperity. The biggest companies in the world, the fastest companies in the world, the great technology developments aren't necessarily in those countries. And they all have, uniqueness about them, whether it's much smaller populations. Norway's got a big oil, reserve in its backyard. But still, Kayleigh, this is the fight. To me, I think this is what it's going to be all about in the midterms. And I really see 2020 being socialism or socialism light, whatever you want to describe it, versus old-fashioned capitalism that no longer serves the public. And by the way, this is something we've seen even in Brexit, where people feel like maybe capitalism doesn't work the way it used to.
Right, and just the proof lies in the economic tides that are rising across the country. But I think you're right. We are going to have that debate, socialism versus capitalism. It's hard to believe that we've even gotten to this point where you look at the Democratic Party and, where Bernie couldn't even find a single co-sponsor for single-payer medicine. Now he has 1/3 of Senate Democrats, 2/3 of House Democrats. There's no denying this party is now the party of Lenin. But I can tell you this, voters will choose the party of Lincoln over the party of Lenin any day. We just have to make the argument articulately.
All right. Thank you both very, very much.